Hello everyone, and welcome to BC Plan PLAR podcast, where we explore all facets of prior learning assessment and recognition. I'm your host, Andrew Skapenko.
And I'm your co-host, Natalie DeVoe, and we're excited to introduce our guests for this episode, who both come from New Brunswick Community College. Our first guest is Patrick Reinartz. He is the Recognition of Prior Learning Coordinator at New Brunswick Community College. Patrick serves as coordinator for NBCC's Prior Learning Assessment and Recognition Pilot. In this role, he contributes to systems and process development aspects of the project, while also providing service, documentation, and support for participants. Patrick has a decade-long background in corporate training, where he acted as LMS administrator and technical support for a leading US-based health services provider. We're also joined by Mackenzie Bartlett, Recognition of Prior Learning Coordinator, New Brunswick Community College. Mackenzie manages the credit transfer and equivalency application processes through the Office of the Registrar at NBCC. Since joining the college in 2019, she has coordinated various continuous improvement projects to strengthen assessment practices, generate workflow efficiencies, and expand RPL services to provide better opportunities for students to achieve recognition for their prior learning. Her background is in teaching and curriculum development in post-secondary institutions. Welcome to this episode, Mackenzie and Patrick.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
The first question is for both of you, Mackenzie and Patrick. We understand that you both work on PLAR at NBCC in quite different ways. And so we wonder if you can describe your current roles so that we understand how they differ from each other and also how they relate to each other. Mackenzie, would you like to start?
Sure. So I started in my role as RPL Coordinator in the fall of 2019. And I was hired, as you mentioned in the intro, to manage the credit transfer and equivalency application processes through the Registrar's office. We have a team of 3 in the RPL office, including myself. And we also have about 80 faculty members across all programs and all 6 campuses in the college who help us with assessments. We call those RPL champions. I take the lead for assessments, so I validate evidence and perform assessments in consultation with the RPL champions when subject matter expertise is required. I've overseen lots of different continuous improvement initiatives in the RPL office since I started in this role. There's been tons of change with more to come. Just as an example, when I started, we were using paper applications, and since then we've switched to online forms, and now we actually have developed an internal workflow system that allows for much more automation and faster processing of applications. So it's really lowered our turnaround times. Patrick works on another piece of that continuous improvement effort for PLAR, so I'll let him explain that project and his role.
Yeah, sure. As Mackenzie mentioned, we already have sort of this full-fledged RPL service. Where we come in is that I came on board towards the end of 2020, and beginning of 2021 is kind of when we really got serious to coordinate a pilot that would basically, it's kind of a more strategic role in the terms that we're exploring new processes and methods for PLAR, just to learn how we can implement those at NBCC in the long term. So it's really a project that's about, developing learning and knowledge for further long-term implementation of experiential learning assessment in particular. We're focused not on credit transfers, but purely on equivalencies with the pilot. And so, like I said, it's very much a fact-finding mission. And in that sense, we're sort of operating parallel to Mackenzie services with RPL, but separate, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Sounds like you're making a good team with Patrick looking after the LMS and Mackenzie, the actual operations of the PLAR.
Yeah, If I may add, actually, we should also, maybe this might be a quick time to give a quick shout out to our colleague, Michelle Chisholm, who's not able to join us for this discussion, but she was also a very, very large part of this pilot, especially on the curricular side.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and we actually hope to speak to her if that works out for her, perhaps when in the fall, after she is back in the position or returns to the role.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
Mackenzie, could you describe a standard PLAR process that students go through from the beginning to the end at NBCC? Which support students get along the way?
Sure. So I guess just to sort of start, I would say, fundamentally, NBCC recognizes that RPL is a really key part of reducing barriers to post-secondary education, which is really important in New Brunswick because we have an aging population and the lowest post-secondary education attainment rate in the country. NBCC really is New Brunswick's college. We're the province's biggest provider of skills training opportunities. And students come to us with all sorts of prior learning, whether they're looking to upskill, change careers, or immigrate to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
We have students with lots of years of work experience and no post-secondary education. And we have students with multiple degrees and diplomas. And everything in between, basically, is what we deal with in the RPL office. So through our services, students have the option to apply for credit using formal learning, or experiential learning, or a combination of both. Our current process is to accept applications each term, so we don't right now accept credit transfer applications up front when the student's accepted to their program, although that's something that we want to work toward. So we have 3 major application seasons each academic year, so those align with the fall, winter, and spring terms. Once students have their schedule, basically, they can apply for any course offered in a given term. And we receive the application through our internal management system, basically, that we've developed. It's called Sharewell, and we process everything there. So everything is contained within the ticket that we receive in the RPL office. So the application form is there, the attachments, the email history, even if we need to communicate with the student. Assessment notes, result notification, appeals, everything's all within that ticket system. Students can see the status of their application on our RPL portal, we call it in Sharewell. So they can log in there and then they can see where their application is in the process. And if assessment's required, we send an email to them to provide additional information just to keep them up to date with, where their application is in our processing. We also communicate with students throughout the process. So if more information is required, for example, if we see that another course on their transcript might be applicable to the course that they want credit for, or if we want to give them a chance to submit additional evidence, we can communicate with them through that application. And of course, we want to give students every chance to demonstrate their learning. But our credit equivalency application process, and I should probably clarify too, credit equivalency, we call any application, any credit granted for experiential learning is credit equivalency, and any credit granted for formal learning is credit transfer. That's kind of how we do it.
Oh, that's a great clarification. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. So that application process for credit equivalency is portfolio based. And I would say that's one of the limitations that we have right now that the PLAR pilot and Patrick and Michelle are working to address. We're very much document based right now, but we want to move to more of those flexible assessment methods. And like I said before, we're also looking to try to front load the credit transfer and equivalency application process so students can apply for any course before they begin their program, which would obviously offer all sorts of advantages for them in terms of knowing their schedule up front, creating seat availability as well for enrollment purposes. It's where we want to go.
Mm-hmm. I got a little bit interested in the Sharewell system that NBCC developed. If I understood correctly, you developed it internally with your IT department?
Yes, our IT department was incredible. We basically had a Lean Six Sigma Kaizen event. Mm-hmm. So we invited stakeholders from lots of different areas across the college to we had meetings with them to go through our processes and identify any inefficiencies, and there were lots at the time. And the solution that we came to was to try to move toward a workflow system that allowed for some automation. And we actually explored different systems that we might have adopted, but in the end, Sharewell was the system that NBCC already had and was using for other help desk ticketing services like through IT or finance even. The IT department suggested Sharewell, and then they developed the whole dashboard that we use now, the whole ticketing system for RPL. They've done tons of customization for us. Our IT department is incredible.
Got it. Did you happen to keep track of, how would you say it, customer satisfaction levels before and after the implementation of the system among PLAR candidates?
It's a good question. It's one of the areas that we really want to improve, is to get more student satisfaction results. So we basically, we did have a student satisfaction survey that went out through Sharewell for a period of time. I think it's kind of stopped now, but we were able to get some feedback through that survey that was really helpful, that it actually did impact, some changes, some continuous improvement measures that we put in place. But I think we need to look more at, implementing, or maybe even becoming part of like our annual student satisfaction survey, like maybe having RPL as a piece of that too, because it is a big deal for students submitting applications, how long it takes, the feedback they get. It's an area that we want to explore without over surveying students too. We're always conscious of that as well.
Yeah, and maybe just the last follow-up question for our listeners. If someone is scoping out the required resources and time to move from paper-based operations to electronic-based, how much time roughly did it take NBCC to move from paper-based format to electronic?
Well, it was actually quite fast at first, because when I started in this role in fall 2019, it was kind of a low point for the RPL office. So that we were still using paper applications at the time, and it was not efficient at all. And our turnaround times were very high, just in terms of, it was taking, I think, over 30 working days to process applications on average. So we had to make a really quick series of changes, because we were going into the winter term, and we didn't want to continue with paper applications. So in the space of about 5 weeks, I would say,
wow,
we moved from paper to online, to the online forms that we used actually for winter 2020 and spring 2020. And then between spring 2020 and fall 2020, that's when we had the Kaizen event, and we developed the Sharewell system that we continue to use now. So that part took about, I think, probably 4 months to implement. It was also very fast, and we didn't have a lot of time to test it. So there was a lot of live testing, I guess, that happened. But luckily it worked out. It's been a huge improvement.
That's great. That's quite inspiring. Patrick, how is the student experience different with your PLAR project in terms of the process that students go through from the beginning to the end?
Yeah, it's quite a bit, as you might imagine. With us being a pilot, we sort of had the freedom to explore some other features and approaches that for the RPL office was just a bit out of reach. So for us, we can try these things with a small group, evaluate what works and what needs improvement. And that's really, like I said, really what we're about. There's some very key features that I think I should touch on. One is that we managed to take our process and take it not only pre-enrollment, but even pre-admissions. In theory, you don't actually even need to be a student to apply for it.
Right. That's quite unique.
Yeah, and tied to that also, we did it on a continuous intake basis. So we weren't tying this down to a specific, window of opportunity. We wanted to basically to have the option for students to come to us at any time with learning they have and have it evaluated was what we wanted to try out. A big part of that is that essentially learners can know where they stand before they begin their program.
Yeah.
And since, as Mackenzie mentioned, we know that PLAR is a huge part of reducing barriers for new learners or returning learners. So it's really just about finding more ways to welcome learners into the college and, putting them on a path to education, skills, security, and employment, all of that. So in addition to the pre-enrollment, pre-admissions, continuous intake, we also had a much more flexible assessment process. Mackenzie described the sort of portfolio-based approach that they've traditionally taken. We wanted to open it up essentially so that the learners could show us their learning in whatever way they felt most comfortable with and whatever was most appropriate for the material they're describing. So we left a very open-ended process for them to submit information, again, using an LMS system where we have a sort of course-based structure that mimics the original courses that are being PLAR'd for. And they would essentially use that, and competency by competency, they could speak to the course using their own experience and their own knowledge to sort of address each competency and show us their knowledge, essentially. That then goes through an assessment team who give us results. And we actually, in the case of a successful application, that goes directly onto the transcript. Now, the part I think that is kind of key to making all of that work is that since they're not students and we don't really know that much about them when they start the process, the thing we realized we really needed to include in the design was a pretty significant upfront component where we sort of screen the learners not only for what their experience is, that they want to apply for this process, but also give them the opportunity to assess themselves. And I think that self-assessment step has been a huge part in helping us identify participants for the pilot, because essentially they're given the competencies of the course up front and are able to right off the bat, see where their own skills fit into that course and whether or not they have equivalent learning, or they might be better off going through the course itself in a more traditional way as a student.
So just to clarify, so when they were doing a self-assessment, they were assessing whether they had the knowledge and skills for the courses they were considering.
Yeah, exactly. So even before we put them into the process, because we recognize that PLAR is, it's a substantial process. It's fairly demanding of the participants. And we want to be able to set up students for success, obviously, in this process. So we thought it was very important to right up front learn exactly how our students felt about not only the material in the courses, but about how their own learning relates to it before we even had them start making submissions or demonstrations of skills or anything like that. Okay,
yeah. And you realized that along the way that was going to be an important component at the very beginning.
Absolutely. There's definitely something part of the thinking from the get-go.
Yeah. Okay, great.
That sounds really cool. It also makes me think, I'm wondering, does it give students higher levels of, how would you say it, autonomy or ownership of the process?
That is the goal, absolutely, is to put the learners in charge of their own learning, essentially. One of the things we often have to stress is that it's not necessarily an easier way to get credit. It is an alternative way to get credit. Yeah. And for the right person, it's just a great fit. We've seen all kinds of feedback already. We're not quite at the evaluation stage yet, but we've already heard from some people that, this is, for them, a very comfortable way of showing what they know.
And did you also hear anything? I've heard some other practitioners comment on the fact that when individuals go through this process, it actually helps them realize what they've learned. They may not have been as aware of it. They were just learning so much on the job, learning so much experientially. And then this gave them a chance to really systematically look at what skills they've developed and articulate it in a way that can be quite empowering. Especially what I've heard is when they go to look for employment, they've already done that work that is sometimes required before doing a resume, before doing an interview. Did you hear any comments like that they felt more in touch, more aware of what they had learned?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a number of the participants have made remarks similar to that. And a few have also just said that, because they are planning to come back and be students after this, they felt that it was just a really great way for them to reconnect with the learning as well before they go and do it in a more formal setting again. It's like I said, it's almost like a crash refresher course that they teach themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So because some of the knowledge may have been dormant for a while and they're sort of waking it up. Okay.
PLAR has so many hidden tools
Yes.
for everyone that it's just fascinating how everyone can benefit so much from PLAR. Our next question is focused on the communication of the PLAR program. And Mackenzie, I was wondering if you could share with us, how does NBCC communicate its PLAR program to faculty, staff, and students? And how are these stakeholders get involved in this whole process of PLAR and communication?
Yeah, we have multiple platforms for communication. In terms of communicating to students, we do things, really straightforward, like posting announcements on Brightspace that they'll see, hopefully. And we also post announcements in our weekly student communication that goes out via email. We have an RPL website that has undergone a lot of changes over the last couple of years. We've developed step-by-step application guides and tips and FAQs. There's also a contact form there that goes directly to our RPL inbox. NBCC also has it's called Ask NBCC. It's a part of the website where students can enter questions, and then they'll get answers on RPL, and then there's any other services at the college as well. And we also do online orientation sessions. I typically do sessions with the international students, at least one prior to them coming in the fall. And also we do new student orientation at the start of the term as well. So we walk them through the process and, here's where you go, here's the website, here are the application links, and we can answer any questions that they have. For faculty and staff, we have developed an internal SharePoint site. So that's where we update, we add process updates or news items. We have links and resources that we're always trying to keep up to date as our processes change. We also do training sessions with faculty and staff throughout the year on any new processes or just reminders about processes and things. We have a faculty orientation session too that we do on Teams. And we also, as I mentioned earlier, we have RPL champions who are sort of designated faculty who help us with assessments. And those champions, they become part of an MS Teams site where we have training resources and videos. We've had Q&A sessions with them, and I would have individual meetings with them as well to discuss assessments if needed. We basically try to take advantage of every communication channel we can. Communication, as we all know, it's really key for all stakeholders. It's not enough to sort of explain, I guess, what RPL is one time. You want to reiterate and keep those doors open so that if people have questions, they kind of know where they can go to get more information.
Mackenzie, I have a follow-up question. I'm glad that you brought up the champions again, because I think that you were speaking about that earlier, and I was curious. It sounds like some of the assessments are handled by your team and some of the assessments are handled by the RPL champions. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
right.
My question is, how do you determine whether an assessment can be done exclusively by your team or whether you need to bring in the content expert? How do you define that line?
Yeah, it's a great question. The first step that we do when we're looking at an application is we'll check we have a list of previously evaluated courses. If an assessment has already happened with the course that the student is submitting, then we can look at that list and it's an easy kind of yes or no based on that result, which we do, review and try to keep up to date as well. If it goes for assessment, so the course that the student's submitting hasn't been assessed before, then they would be required to submit a detailed course outline that would include the learning outcomes, assessment methods, content, all those sorts of things. And then we would compare that with our course profile. And depending on the level of detail in the course outline, we can typically determine just based on the information that's contained in those documents, whether 80% of the competencies, scope, depth, and level of learning have been achieved in that course. And if we're not sure or there's any doubt about that, then that's when we would bring in the subject matter experts. There's obviously courses too that are just, well beyond anything that we are aware of. And so having the subject matter expert look at it is a really, key part of that process for sure.
Yeah.
But sometimes you can see it without it having to go to the faculty member. So we try to basically, we don't want everything to go to the faculty because it doesn't all have to go to them. We want to make sure that we're conscious of their time commitment as well to doing this. So because we do have a lot of applications that we get every year. So that's kind of how we basically manage it. But it's, I think, the case with anything related to PLAR. There's a certain level of subjectivity that always is there, and it's hard to draw the firm line. I would say that as soon as we are not sure, then it goes to the subject matter expert, or if it's just well beyond what we could even hope to understand, it goes to them for sure.
But it sounds like there's a core set of courses that you've handled quite a lot, yes, and the assessments are quite well defined. So you've handled them before. So those ones you can do internally. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's right. And any faculty assessment then also, gets added to, we call it our master list. So it just sort of makes the process for the next student who wants to use that same course go smoother. So we don't have to keep doing the same assessments over and over again.
Right. Patrick, were communications to faculty, staff, and students about your pilot handled differently?
Yes and no. Being a pilot, we had to first of all have a bit of an announcement and a bit of an internal awareness campaign about the existence of the pilot. That also included, having information sessions with our recruitment team, for example, so that they were aware of these things. A lot of just sort of targeted communication at specific groups that we knew would be touched by this process. For participants, we actually also, in addition to, having sessions with recruitment, our recruitment team actually also helped us host information sessions for potential participants. So that was one way that we were able to gather some interest from people who are already investigating the college, so to speak. We have, our usual sort of web presence and some YouTube advertising sort of, some promotional videos and that sort of thing, just to get the word out. But in terms of internal communication, I think a thing that's really key for our pilot was that we had a working group involved in this pilot right from the get-go that involved stakeholders from across the college. So there was representation from faculty, student services and information systems, finances, policy office, registrar's office. So I think a large part of us being able to put this thing into motion was having all of those stakeholders on board and informed from the design stage even. They were there with us every week, essentially, listening in on what we were developing.
Right. And did the original impetus come from somebody in that working group, like a department in that working group? What I mean is because in my experience, I've had people in my trades department in a specific trades program come to me and say, look, we're getting interest from people who are working in this area. They want to do our program. They don't believe they need to do the 100 level courses. So could you set something up? And so I worked with them to design a program tailored to that program. Was it like that? There was somebody in another department that requested?
It was a combination of factors, actually. For one thing, there's the growing pains of the RPL office that Mackenzie described earlier. And so I think there was definitely recognition that, it was a good time to look at some of those processes again. And the thing that we haven't actually touched on yet is that our pilot actually receives funding through a group called Atlantic College Atlantique, through their College Transformation des Collèges fund, in conjunction with Future Skills Canada. So when that became available to us, the timing was just very right to start exploring these processes, again, because of what Mackenzie was just describing that was going on their side of things. So it was something that came together very naturally.
Yeah. In fact, you're actually addressing the next question. You're starting to address that. And it's very important to look at that. The next question is about how PLAR is supported at NBCC on the institutional level, or even beyond that, by external partnerships and levels of government. So that's what you're talking about, right, Patrick?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of internally and having, institutional support, that working group that I mentioned was a huge part of our success in getting this program launched. In addition to the help of the other colleges that were members of the ACA, we had a sort of a community of practice among those of us who had PLAR-related projects going on. So that we were able to, discuss our challenges and discuss our successes and just get all of that conversation out into the open. In addition to that, we also had consultation with industry. Our pilot focuses on 2 IT programs. So we had meetings with at least 3 members, I believe, of the New Brunswick tech community as well. Again, providing consultation not only on industry sort of expectation and needs of this kind of program, but also making sure that that our assessment processes line up with their sort of expectations of what they want to see in a student.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything to add to that, Mackenzie? I'm not sure if I skipped anything there, but.
Yeah, that's great. If we could go, Mackenzie, is there anything about institutional level support or external partnerships, levels of government that are supporting RPL work?
Yeah, well, I'm just on a really basic level, I guess. NBCC is a provincial crown corporation directed by a board of governors. So we do receive government funding as a significant piece of our budget. We also work with the CAT-NB, so the Council on Articulations and Transfer of New Brunswick. It's a provincial organization, and its stakeholders work to ensure students can move smoothly from one New Brunswick institution to another. And they also ensure appropriate and effective use of PLAR to support learners. So I sit on that council with our Registrar and VP Academic, and then there's representation from other publicly funded post-secondary institutions in the province, as well as labor and industry representatives. It's a great kind of opportunity to share ideas and work on, there's some province-wide projects and conferences and that sort of thing. And I would co-sign what Patrick said about the internal institutional support. We've had tons of that in the RPL office over the last couple of years, which I think I mentioned earlier. Obviously the RPL Champion project is a huge part of that, and our IT team working with us to implement the new application forms and dashboards, which has had a hugely positive impact on students. We have great support from the Registrar's office and student development, and our recruitment teams who share information about RPL with new students, and international student advisors as well. And then, of course, there's sort of senior level of management too has given enormous support to the strategic initiatives that we have done over the last couple of years. And that support has been really key to our success in many cases.
Speaking about the supports, and it kind of leads into the question about the data about all of the supports available and how do we know that supports are effective. And we were wondering, Mackenzie and Patrick, are there any numbers or metrics that you find significant regarding the NBCC's PLAR program? Maybe it can be the size of the department or the time a student spends on a PLAR application or something related to the fees. Which numbers stand out when you think about NBCC's PLAR program and department?
Yeah, I can take that one. I think the big thing that sticks out to me is our overall numbers and then our turnaround times over the last couple of years, the improvement that we've made. So just to give you a sense, our totals in the academic year 2019 to 2020, total credit transfer and equivalency applications was 1,427. And the following year, 2020 to 2021, we had the numbers dropped some to 1,164. And, obviously COVID had an impact there, but also we did create more efficient processes that resulted in fewer duplicate applications too. So I think that helped with the numbers some. But this year we're back on track, and going into the spring term, we're currently over 1,200. So I think we're probably going to overall have more total applications than we did in 2019, 2020. And we're looking to continue to, grow in that area too. We want to, appeal to more students. And Our turnaround times have drastically been reduced since fall 2019. As I mentioned earlier, the dreaded paper application time where we had a lot of inefficiencies, as you can imagine with that. Just there wasn't really like a central way for students to submit their applications. We were processing papers and filing them and then having to courier them to assessors as well across the province. Like there was just a lot of waste and money and all of that. And at that time in the fall, our average, I think I mentioned this earlier, but our average turnaround time was just over 30 working days. So it was 6 weeks on average. So some students waited longer than that. And, just imagine you're sitting in class as a student, you've submitted your RPL application and you don't get a response until 6 weeks after you submitted. It caused a lot of frustration for students and faculty as well and staff. So that's why we made all those changes so quickly going into the winter 2020 period when we moved online applications and got rid of the paper applications. And that definitely helped our turnaround times. We went from just over 30 working days to just a bit more than 21 working days in that winter. And then with the next step in our continuous improvement, where we moved to Sharewell, our internal system, that has cut the turnaround time way down. So ever since fall 2020, when we implemented the Sharewell system, our average turnaround time has been anywhere between 8 and 9 working days.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not bad. Amazing.
Yeah, it's been a huge improvement for students. I mean, just not having to wait for so long, to get their results. And it really did come down to identifying those process gaps and just implementing more automation in our systems. Like we have integration now between student information management systems and curriculum management systems and the client service management system that we're using too. So it just has helped us to manage the volume of applications better for sure.
That's really interesting. Patrick, are there any numbers that you want to highlight from your work?
I have to maybe skip that one for now. The only reason being that we have not really gotten to the sort of research and evaluation stage yet of really looking at what we have in front of us. All I would have right now is anecdotal, qualitative sort of information.
Yeah, that's fine. The next question is about initiatives. What are some of the initiatives NBCC is currently working on? This question can go to both of you, to one of you, if there's anything that you want to comment on.
Yeah, I can start. As like any college, I think we have a lot of projects going on. And we obviously don't have our hands in all of these, but I did ask around a little bit just to kind of see, what some of the major things were that we do also have going on that we should be talking about more. And there's quite a few of them, obviously, but a few sort of highlights that I picked out. There's a program called FastNB that's currently launching which stands for Facilitating Access to Skilled Talent. It's essentially just an assessment tool for students who are wanting to get into trades who actually also already have significant experience in learning. So this definitely relates to PLAR in some ways. And the program essentially helps them identify their skill gaps, acquire key learning, and then connects them with employers looking for tradespeople with those skills. So although the outcome focus is different, it's also an additional initiative that's really looking at experiential learning and trying to find more value for that.
Yeah, what is it called, Patrick?
FastNB. In addition to that, there's, of course, a lot of the usual sort of college concerns. There's projects related to scheduling and billing and having all of those elements overhauled. There's a qualification framework developed at NBCC that's quite significant. That's essentially about providing a consistent model for recognizing different levels of qualifications. That's been a huge topic of discussion in the last while as well. And that related to that, there's also, of course, an increased focus on development of micro-credentials. Which feeds into that same topic as well. So a lot going on and almost more than we could fill in an hour with.
Yeah, people, I mean, it's good though, right? That people are looking for opportunities to innovate 100%. And to service more niche areas.
Absolutely.
Speaking about all of the opportunities, that NBCC is currently involved in. Are there any initiatives that you would like to give more attention to and highlight them?
The only other thing project that I would mention is I think I mentioned it earlier, but we are looking at front loading the credit transfer process at NBCC so that students don't have to wait to be enrolled in their courses in order to apply, and we can just do all of the assessments up front for the whole program for the students. So, more of a model that universities in the region might use. There's different institutions that would follow that type of model. We need to figure out how to transition there because as I mentioned earlier, our current process is to process applications in each term for courses offered in that term. So we need to figure out how we're going to make all that happen before the student ever sets foot in the class, which is just going to be a huge benefit to the student, for all kinds of reasons. If they want to have a part-time job while they're attending NBCC, knowing what their schedule is going to be, knowing that maybe this term they're going to have a lighter schedule because they got credit for a couple of courses, it allows them flexibility, which we really want to, create. It also just for student loans and things like that, it just really helps students to be aware of what they're going to get credit for up front. That's a project that we're definitely working toward.
Mackenzie, is that just for credit transfer or also for credit equivalency?
Well, we were focused on credit transfer. Most of our applications currently are credit transfer, but I do think that it's going to be credit equivalency as well. We haven't 100% made that decision yet, I think, but I would guess that it would be, and it certainly dovetails with the work that Patrick and Michelle are doing in the PLAR pilot, and like Patrick said, they're looking at even pre-admissions.
Yeah, that was my next question. Are you thinking about going that far, pre-admission, or they've applied, they've been admitted, but you'll look at the entire program rather than just semester by semester?
Yeah, I think at first we would look at the students who are accepted to their program. But the ultimate goal is exactly what you just said. It would be to provide that service to students or prospective students before they ever even apply to NBCC. Wouldn't that be the ideal? They could just reach out to us and we could do an analysis of their learning and tell them, yeah, you can get credit for this number of courses in this program. So it would, be a huge benefit, I think. But we're not quite there yet. So sort of a step-by-step approach, but I think that's the vision ultimately.
Yeah, but I certainly can understand from the student's perspective that they would like that information in order to make a decision about where to go.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Patrick, I think maybe we could ask this question to you. The IT pilot project, in looking at the NBCC website, it looks like it's going on, and you already touched on it during the interview. How is it progressing? When is it planned to conclude, and what are you expecting to get out of it?
Absolutely. We're concluding fairly soon, probably within the next few months, in terms of finishing up any remaining assessments and submissions from participants. But the big thing that comes after that is all of the evaluation and research of the outcomes. What we hope to get out of it is essentially the learning that we need to develop a more long-term sustainable version of PLAR that can then be integrated into the RPL office's services. We don't know exactly what that looks like yet because it's very early days, of course, but we know we don't always want this to be a separate process, right? And especially where Mackenzie's office is now talking about bringing their assessment processes closer to the admission stage, that's actually a really good tie-in for what we're doing, right? Because we also want to be able to provide these assessments before the person necessarily shows up for class. So what we're really doing out of this pilot is getting all of the learning we need to make sure that the costs are sustainable, that the assessment processes are sustainable, that our communications to students are clear and that they understand what the process is about. We're learning a lot about, what kind of guidance and instructions that people need to be successful in PLAR. It's just a wealth of information that we're getting from it.
Thank you. maybe it would be nice to do a part number 2 of the interview
Yes, I think so.
later in the fall. And,
After you
and
crunch
talk
your
about the
numbers, Patrick.
outcomes of the
Yeah,
project.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's still going to be so much more to still talk about, I know.
Yeah, that sounds good. And to conclude our interview, Patrick and Mackenzie, is there anything that you would like to share with other PLAR practitioners that might help them in their work?
Sure, I can start. I think what we have learned in the RPL office is just having the support. Having support at all levels of your institution is really key. Having a shared belief, that's communicated through senior leadership on down in the power of prior learning and the importance of providing our services to all students so that we can reduce barriers to post-secondary education. NBCC, I feel lucky to work there because they really do encourage a continuous improvement mindset, I would say, across the college. There's a real willingness to embrace change and to work hard, because it is hard work, to give students the opportunity to demonstrate their learning and be recognized for it. It's scary at times, I think. Change is always challenging, but it's important also to admit when things aren't going the way we want them to. That's been the journey that we've been on in the RPL office, sort of having those moments of recognition and taking time to think about why that is. And we found bringing in stakeholders outside of our office to figure out how the service can improve was really important. So sometimes you need an external set of eyes on the problem to come to a new solution. And doing that really has the added benefit of making sure everyone feels like they have a voice and a stake in the process as well.
Yeah, I would echo not only what Mackenzie said, but I would add also just that, communication about PLAR in general is something we've learned is actually quite complicated. Even for folks who understand the meaning of PLAR and the values of PLAR, there's still a myriad ways of doing it and implementing it. So I think what we've learned is, on one hand, is that we really need to be patient in our communication and concise as well, and clear about what it is we want to do and what we want to come out of it. Just because, like I said, PLAR can take on so many different forms, and people can have very different understandings of it as well. So I think having everyone on the same page with a unified vision, like Mackenzie suggested, is a huge part of being successful in it.
Right. Well, thank you very much for sharing such an in-depth advice, and also thank you very much for the in-depth conversation in this episode. I'm sure that we all learned so much, and I couldn't help but compliment how good of a communication system NBCC has.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us.
We'll be looking forward to part 2 to talk about the idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looking forward to it.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.